is critical biblical scholarship. And they're part of the shul, and they're active in the shul, and they learn, and they get aliyahs, and they give Divrei Torah, but they try to be careful not to say something that's too heretical, too obviously heretical. Sometimes Hamevin Yavin. They may give a drasha, so somebody who knows what's going on in the world of scholarship can sense, what they're doing without them being explicit. I've never given a Dvar Torah in my shul, even though I've been asked to do so, because I don't want to discuss these things on Shabbat to a captive audience. I would like people to read the book, talk about it, to think about it, but not to push it in their face on shul. But again, not everybody really is comfortable with this. They feel threatened, or it's not part of what they think you should be discussing on Shabbat. So on one hand, so even our shul, some members would be uncomfortable with a person who's entirely Shomer Shabbat, devout, pious, however, who has theological views that challenge traditional orthodoxy. Now, I do know that Kugel has lectured in some other modern Orthodox shuls. So, it depends upon the particular context. I don't know who decides what in these things. But overall, I have found that it's very difficult to discuss in a modern Orthodox shul, not in a Haredi environment, but even in a modern Orthodox shul, modern critical biblical scholarship in an open and honest way. I think that's such an important issue. I think that young members of the congregation, they go to a day school. If the day school doesn't discuss this, they'll get the Bible 101 in college, and they'll feel betrayed. They'll feel that I was lied to, that things were being hidden from me. I think it should be discussed much earlier, even in Orthodox day schools, maybe especially in Orthodox day schools. And Orthodoxy has to come up with ways of preserving its values, even if it has to change in maybe a radical way, its theology. And that's what Tamar Ross is trying to do. That's what Mark Shapiro is different, because Mark Shapiro, from your interview, seems to be saying that he doesn't accept critical biblical scholarship's basic findings. But he says even if he were convinced of it, then he would accept it because truth is a core value in his understanding of Orthodox Judaism, and he doesn't think it would change his behavior in any way. That may be the case. I don't know. So I think you have to have people. I wrote to David Schatz about this, who I communicated a lot in writing my book, and I have excerpts from my communication in the text and the footnotes. And I said to him, you've written some fascinating, courageous pieces about, let's say, the concept of the soul and how that's being challenged by neuropsychology. And I say, I hope at some point you'll be able to also address with the same philosophical sophistication that you address other central issues that challenge traditional Orthodox theological beliefs, to do the same thing with modern critical biblical scholarship. I don't think he's ready to do that. He may not accept it. But I would hope that people like David Schatz would be more openly addressing these things, and not in a defensive way. You have this book that Shalom Karmi edited, I think, Torah and Modern Scholarship, which I quote a lot from, which again, I think are examples of avoidance, of disingenuousness, of intellectual dishonesty by people who you would expect that because they are academics and scholars and sophisticated thinkers, they would be directly addressing this issue, and they're avoiding it. And that's why my book has as its cover picture an ostrich which is with its head in the sand. And of course, I'm interested in why are they doing this. So that a lot of that is psychological. They're doing it because they're afraid, rightly or wrongly, that by examining these issues in an honest, open, straightforward way, it's going to threaten the way of life that to them is deeply meaningful, and the lifestyle that they have is deeply meaningful. And my argument is you can't sustain a lifestyle for the long run that's built on pillars of sand. You have to face the truth, incorporate it in a more plausible way, and come up with a strong case as to why your lifestyle is still a very important and valuable one. But also, like I told Schatz, and I don't know if it's in the book, but in communication that we had, for example, take the whole notion of the aguna, of, the woman who can't get a get. I say, well, the reason you can't solve the aguna problem is because you're simply trapped by your belief that the halacha, based upon the Torah and based upon the Torah Shebe'al Peh, means that God defines that if a woman doesn't have a get, and then she remarries, if the get wasn't given to her by her husband, then she can't. Then she has to be an aguna. Otherwise, it'll be adultery. But if you acknowledge that these laws are man-made, so then you have much greater flexibility in addressing this very prominent, very painful moral, ethical problem that orthodoxy is facing. But you're trapped in your dogmatic commitments. So I understand where they're coming from, and when I teach this to students, I try to be as empathetic as I can. The reason why it's hard for them to come up with solutions is because they have this belief system. And if you believe that it's adultery, if you don't go through the necessary halachic procedure of a get, then okay, you don't want to have, you don't want to sanction adultery. But it's only adultery if you believe it's only adultery in the divine as a divine, sin. If you believe that this is divinely mandated, but if you're willing to accept that there's the human as a human construction, so then you have much greater freedom. Now, maybe that means you can't be orthodox anymore. At least orthodox in the DOX part of it. Of the belief system. It could be. I mean, John Levinson talks about this. I think I quote him. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Talk one of his books about maybe you can't be orthodox DOX and also accept the overall way of looking at the Bible from modern critical biblical scholarship. John Levinson himself is a very traditional Jew. I mean, he's a friend. I know him personally, but he totally buys into the overall approach of modern critical biblical scholarship. He has another. I don't think he's articulated his theology in any formal way, but he must have some theological grounding for why he continues to live an orthodox lifestyle, keeping the mitzvot, believing in commandment, even though he accepts biblical scholarship. He writes in his field with biblical scholarship. Louis Jacobs tried to do the same thing, but he didn't define himself anymore as orthodox. It was more like conservative from a sort of T. Baruch Schwartz, whom I quote in the book and footnotes, and I've communicated with, similarly is claims that halakha is binding without the belief in the traditional Torah L'Moshe Sinai doctrine. So there are people who are kind of trying to do this, and I would like to see more of that coming out in the modern Orthodox world. Now, some will come up with arguments that are more convincing, less convincing, but at least they're trying. They're facing the reality. They're picking their head up out of the sand and looking at reality, at science and at scholarship and at moral issues, and saying we got to do something to improve the orthodoxy that is so meaningful and dear to us, so that we can make it better than what it is, and also more honest.
How do you spell the last name of Schatz? David Schatz?
David Schatz, I think it's Shatz.
Okay.
Yeah, you can look in the notes in my bibliography. Yeah. There's two Schatzes, but the one I'm talking about is David Schatz. He's a very prominent Yeshiva University and Columbia professor.
How many Orthodox rabbis engaged honestly with you on this topic? Going into a song and a dance?
Not many. I did have one, I think, unpleasant interaction at a conference with an Orthodox rabbi when I gave a paper that kind of, expressed some of these ideas. And, but not that many of them have spoken to me about it. I mean, I'm not a member of any rabbinical organization. So it's not like I go to the RCA or some other organization and, talk about this. I would hope that that they're reading it. I hope that you can get them to read it. I don't know exactly who reads your blog, and a lot of people read it. Because I want to be criticized. I want to be challenged. I like the fact that you're asking me tough questions.
Thank you.
And what?
I said thank you, but
yeah.
I was asking you how many Orthodox rabbis engaged honestly with you on this subject, and so I'm wondering, did any of them, or did they all stop playing word games?
Well, the truth is, as I say, I haven't interacted that much with them. I do talk with my own rabbi, and I can talk with him very openly, and he doesn't play word games. He's planning to read the book soon. He told me he was very busy. He plans to read it over the vacation. But the truth of the matter is, I haven't, I've interacted with people in the sense that with many rabbis in my correspondence over the years, and also, as indicated in the book, that I first gave a paper in 1996 at the American Academy of Religion, from which this book really developed. And then there was a lot of discussion of it that was the early years of the internet.